Stories Lost is back with a case of high strangeness from Belgium, featuring robotic-type twin humanoids and traumatic car troubles. Right, here we go. Picture yourself driving through the Belgian countryside at night. The air is still, the road is empty, and everything seems fine. Then, out of nowhere, your car decides to give up on life. No engine, no headlights, not even the radio to keep you company. And as you sit there in the dark, wondering if the universe is playing a cruel joke on you, you notice something even more harrowing. At first it looks like a hay cart. Okay, weird, but not that weird. But then you realize it's standing on 3 legs, glowing, and looks like a movie prop rolled straight out of a set. And if that wasn't bad enough, a pair of things starts walking toward you. They're short, stiff, and humanoid, with pear-shaped faces and demeanors that wouldn't look out of place on a soldier. Oh, and just when you think it's all over, these creatures decide to drop by again a few months later. Because one encounter with the unknown apparently wasn't enough. This is the Warneton UFO incident. It's bizarre, it's unsettling, and at times reminiscent of the hitchhiker cases we covered in an earlier episode. So, let's take a look at what a lot of people actually believe went down that winter in Belgium. But as always here on Stories Lost, you are free to form your own opinions. On January 27th, 1972, a 31-year-old Frenchman drove his Citroën AMI6 toward Warneton in Belgium, near the French border. It was approximately 8:40 p.m., and he was nearing Warneton. The road was wet with rainwater, and there was a full moon. The car radio tape player was on, and he was driving at a steady speed of about 65 kilometers per hour. Suddenly, the car's headlights went dark, and almost simultaneously, the engine stopped. Even the radio fell silent. Surprised, the man put the car in neutral and coasted a few hundred meters down the slight incline. Once the car slowed to a complete stop, he pulled the handbrake. As a skilled car mechanic, he assumed there must be some sort of short circuit in the electrical system. As soon as the car stopped, he intended to step out and locate the issue. With his left hand on the door handle and his right hand braced against the seat, he prepared to exit the car. But before he could do anything further, he turned his head slightly to the right and noticed something through the side window, about 150 meters away from the roadside. At first, he thought it was an abandoned hay cart, but then he noticed the orange-white lights coming from the object, which appeared to be standing on 3 legs. As he looked closer, he realized it wasn't a hay cart at all, but a rather unfamiliar object. Its shape reminded him of the helmets worn by British soldiers during the First World War. Just as he squinted into the darkness, something else caught his attention. Through the windshield, he spotted 2 figures about 30 meters from the car, out in the nearby field. A farmer and his son, he thought. However, he soon realized these 2 figures had nothing to do with farming. They moved stiffly and slowly toward the car. They stopped about 15 meters away, but after a brief pause, they continued moving closer. Now he could make out more details. One of them, the shorter figure, resembled the character from Michelin advertisements, though the rings around its body were subtle. The figure's helmet was round and equipped with a wide, glass-like panel, through which most of its face was visible. In its right hand, it held a peculiar device that resembled a short, thick ruler with a pyramid-shaped tip. It held the device like a pistol, pointing it toward the car. The other figure, slightly taller than the first, who stood about 125 centimeters, walked slightly ahead. Its silhouette was different. It wore a cylindrical helmet with opaque sides. The front, however, was transparent, and through it, he could clearly see its ghostly face. The expressions on their faces were identical, like those of twins. The shape of the head most resembled a pale, elongated pear, with 2 perfectly round eyes reminiscent of agate marbles, slightly sunken relative to the rest of the face. They were similar to the eye sockets of a human, with barely visible traces of eyebrows. The nose was narrow and only faintly prominent against the face. The mouth was a horizontal slit without lips. When one of the beings briefly opened its mouth, the observer saw neither a tongue nor teeth. In the cylindrical helmet, under the chin, the being had a black rectangular box. Its suit was a dull metallic gray color and appeared to be made of a single piece, extending from the helmet to the fingertips and feet. Notably, their boots were heavy and pointed. On top of the helmet, there was a type of tube that might have been connected to a breathing apparatus. The being had an athletic build, with broad shoulders and narrow hips. It resembled a matador with a black belt around its waist. The belt had a glowing or phosphorescent oval at the position where the buckle would usually be. A strap ran from the belt diagonally upward to the left shoulder. On either side of the chest was a row of buttons running all the way down. The two entities had very long arms, and their hands reached just below their knees. The man was able to observe the beings' faces in great detail, thanks to a muted but steady light inside their helmets. However, the light didn't seem to shine outward. Shortly after the beings resumed their approach toward the witness and stopped very close to the ditch, the man felt a slight shock at the base of his skull, near the cerebellum. Immediately following this shock, he heard a deep, modulated sound whose intensity increased noticeably. He specified that this sound, heard while all the car doors were closed, did not reach him through his ears. He sat frozen in his seat, stunned and overwhelmed by what he saw. Just before he felt the faint shock to his head, the being in the cylindrical helmet had opened its mouth as if it intended to speak, but the observer heard no sound. Right from the moment he encountered the beings, the driver had also noticed a third figure, similar to the first being, the one who resembled a Michelin man. This third being remained by the UFO the entire time, never leaving its post. Let us now return to the two entities standing by the ditch. It's difficult to determine how long their tête-à-tête with the driver lasted, as seconds in such situations can feel extraordinarily long. At one point, a glowing oval-shaped object detached from the belt of the being in the cylindrical helmet and dropped to the ground from waist height. Strangely, the entity didn't appear to notice the object falling or show any interest in retrieving it. Whether this object was made of solid material is unknown, as no direct evidence was recovered. This might have been because the incident only came to light 2.5 months later when the driver finally spoke about it, having remained silent out of fear of being ridiculed. In the meantime, the field had been plowed by the farmer, who was unaware of the landing. However, this tête-à-tête was quickly interrupted. Suddenly, the two beings turned their heads to the left in a perfectly synchronized motion and looked at a point behind the driver's car. The muted sound ceased without any accompanying shock, and still moving in perfect unison, the two entities made an about-face. They pivoted on one leg and turned their backs to the driver. The man noticed no particular details during this turn, except for a strap on one being that ran from its shoulder down across its back to the waist. They then walked briskly toward the UFO. Their movements were almost human. They bent their knees, and their legs moved normally, with one notable exception. They seemed completely unaffected by the muddy white clay in the field. In fact, they appeared to walk with remarkable ease, as if on firm ground. The observer doesn't recall how the beings boarded their craft, but he does remember that the 3 legs of the UFO retracted, and the machine then rose about 1/2 meter above the ground. After hovering motionlessly for 3 or 4 seconds, it began to ascend horizontally. The craft angled at about 60 to 70 degrees and eventually disappeared from view. Just as the craft was leaving the area, the man saw in his rearview mirror the lights of another car approaching. Realizing that he had suddenly been released from the state of paralysis he had been in, the man collapsed over the steering wheel. He felt an indescribable sense of relief, but also wondered whether he had dreamed the entire event or experienced some sort of hallucination. Meanwhile, the other car approached. It was driven by a Belgian who stopped in front of the observer's car with his headlights fully on. The Belgian got out, walked over, and opened the door. where he found the man collapsed over the steering wheel, still gripping the door handle tightly. The man gradually calmed down, and the Belgian asked, "Has someone attacked you?" To this, the man simply replied, "Did you see them too?" "Yes," the Belgian answered. He had also seen the beings and experienced engine disturbances, although his headlights had continued to work without any issues. The Belgian said goodbye and drove off. The man's headlights and radio started working again, and he was able to start the engine. He drove home as quickly as he could. It should be noted that the Belgian driver had promised the Frenchman that he would return with some friends to look for traces of the landing. He said that if they found any evidence, the incident would be made public. Otherwise, they would drop the matter. The Belgian had taken the witness's address, but when the man heard nothing further from him, he assumed the Belgian had found nothing of interest. The witness would later report additional details regarding the UFO. Its height was estimated at 2.5 to 3 meters, and its diameter at 8 to 9 meters. There appeared to be no structural details other than the dome on top, and no changes in shape were observed. The color changes, which came from lights on the craft, occurred in the following sequence: orange-white, blue, reddish, like a dull garnet red, and finally a cool blue before it flew away. From the moment the beings began walking briskly back toward the UFO, the blue light also began to pulse, resembling the flashing lights of a police car. All these color changes occurred on the upper part of the craft, which at the start of the observation had been orange with hints of white. These shifting lights remained confined to the craft itself and did not extend beyond its structure. The only light reflected outward was from underneath the UFO, which seemed to emanate from its interior. This white light illuminated the ground between the 3 landing legs, but it disappeared the moment the UFO lifted off. Throughout the entire event, the craft did not move or undergo any changes in shape. It only changed color. The man estimated the observation time to be approximately 20 minutes. He didn't have a watch but calculated the duration based on the delay the incident caused. Despite the fact that there were several houses nearby, it appeared that no one else noticed anything unusual. Those questioned later stated that they had been watching TV the entire time and could not recall any disturbances. The car's radio tape player remained damaged after the event. It was noted that from that evening on, its performance was erratic. Previously, it had worked without any issues. After the incident, the man had to turn up the volume much higher than before, and the programs were difficult to hear due to interference and background noise. Almost exactly 4 months later, on Tuesday, June 6, 1972, a second encounter occurred. Strangely enough, it happened in the same location as the January incident, at the same time of night and under similar conditions. The man was on his way home after attending an adult education class. The 2 beings, likely the same as in January, were standing to the right of the roadside, appearing as if they were hitchhikers. As in the first encounter, the car engine began to sputter. But since it was still daylight, he couldn't confirm any issues with the headlights, as they were off. The radio tape player was silent, as it had not been turned on. The witness stopped his car when he reached the 2 beings, who were now so close they could touch the vehicle. The man remained seated in the driver's seat. Once again, he felt a faint shock at the back of his head, followed by a muted sound, which then ceased. After barely 2 to 3 minutes, the beings suddenly vanished. They simply dissolved without a sound or any other reaction. A few seconds after the sudden disappearance of the 2 beings, the radio resumed playing, without the witness touching it. The engine restarted without any difficulty, and the witness drove home, somewhat shaken by this new encounter, though much less so than the first time. Shortly before this new contact, the witness had been overtaken by a Ford car with Belgian plates, which was then about a kilometer ahead. Apparently, this vehicle experienced no disturbances and did not see the 2 UFO beings standing by the side of the road. Either the driver didn't notice them, or perhaps they weren't visible to him at all. However, during the beginning of this new encounter, the witness actively searched for any object that might have been nearby. Despite this, he saw no craft or flying object either on the ground or in the vicinity. The case was carefully investigated by local ufologists Monsieur Bazin and his son, along with Monsieur Bigorne and Monsieur Boisdin, both renowned ufologists affiliated with Lumière dans la nuit. These researchers thoroughly analyzed the witness's testimony and surrounding circumstances. In LDLN, they noted, "We believe it is worth noting that we conducted a very thorough investigation of the witness, and his sincerity cannot be called into question. We can conclude that extraordinary events, beyond our usual understanding, took place in the Warneton region. We will not attempt to interpret these events, limiting ourselves instead to strictly and objectively verifying them and reporting them as they occurred. For us, this represents a highly significant case, which we will continue to follow closely." All right, let's unpack this strange little slice of high strangeness. Reported car malfunctions, engine failure, lights cutting out, and a radio going dead set the stage for what could be a textbook UFO encounter. Electromagnetic interference? Sounds about right. This kind of thing has cropped up in plenty of other cases, often linked to localized fields or radiation messing with electronics. But let's not rule out the other possibility, the witness themselves. Stress, fear, or some kind of neurological reaction could explain the apparent failure of the car's systems, externalizing their own heightened perception into a mechanical drama. Either way, it's a question worth asking. Then there's the real head-turner, the beings themselves. Their synchronized movements, rigid and deliberate, aren't just unsettling. They scream design, whether mechanical or biological. The pear-shaped heads and metallic suits, straight out of a cosmic workshop, crafted for a purpose we can only guess at. Are these things independent entities, acting on their own, or just proxies? Advanced tools sent by a greater intelligence pulling the strings? The details are eerie enough to make you wonder whether their design is meant for our world, or some purpose that's completely alien to us. Every piece of this encounter raises the stakes, hinting at something more. Be it advanced technology, psychological projection, or a genuine brush with the unknown. Whatever it is, one thing's certain: it's as unsettling as it is fascinating. To be sure, repeated encounters like this one are exceptionally rare in the field of UFO studies, adding another layer of complexity to the case. The physiological details described by the witness, including the shock at the base of the skull and the perception of sound without auditory input, suggest potential neurological involvement. Could these sensations indicate a biological response to external stimuli, such as infrasound or electromagnetic waves? Or do they point to a psychological reaction, such as a dissociative or hallucinatory state triggered by the intense circumstances of the encounter? At the same time, the witness's consistent and detailed testimony, coupled with the thorough investigation conducted by both local and seasoned ufologists, adds a layer of credibility to the account. Among the investigators was Jean-Marie Bigorne, known for his role in the Mosin incident. We covered that case in an earlier episode, and we will link it in the description. Do these cases align? How does this case compare to the Mosin incident or our latest hitchhiker episode? Are there threads connecting them, or do they stand apart? We'll leave that for you to consider. Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. If you liked this episode, give us a thumbs up, and why not subscribe so you don't miss future updates. Thanks for your support, and we hope to see you back for our next episode.